The morning shimmered with the kind of sunlight that makes everything look like a promise. The ballroom of the Grand Imperial in downtown Atlanta glowed under ivory drapes and crystal chandeliers. Maya Rahman stood near the window, watching the city blur beyond the glass. Inside, violins whispered through the air, and the scent of lilies, Lena's favorite, floated between the guests. It was her brother Ari's wedding day, and every detail looked like it had been woven out of hope. Ari's had always been the quiet protector in Maya's life. After their parents' car accident, he became both anchor and compass, steady, calm, the kind of man who carried storms without letting anyone feel the wind. Seeing him now in a black tailored tuxedo, smiling down at his bride, filled her chest with an ache that was half pride, half disbelief. Lena Kasim, graceful in white satin, carried herself with the soft confidence of someone who knew her worth, but didn't have to prove it. She had an honesty that made people exhale around her. Maya had often told Ariz he was lucky. Today, she simply believed it. Her husband, Rayyan Mirza, had been the one to plan most of the event logistics. His perfectionism was legendary. He knew how to charm staff, calm tensions, and make people feel seen. Maya adored that in him. 5 years of marriage had taught her that Rayyan could walk into any room and leave with everyone smiling. When he slipped an arm around her waist that morning and murmured, "Everything looks perfect, just like you," she felt the same warmth she did when they were newly married. Beside them, her younger sister Nadia laughed with the bridesmaids, her silver dress catching light as easily as her smile did. Nadia had always been spontaneous, restless, a magnetic mix of innocence and danger. Maya thought everything was balanced. Ariz had found his forever. She had her marriage, her sister, her small world of contentment. It was a day built for joy. Sometime before the ceremony, as guests began to take their seats, Maya noticed Rayyan slip away. He smiled, mouthed work call, and gestured to his phone. She nodded, thinking nothing of it. Nadia disappeared soon after, mumbling something about fixing her makeup. The timing was so ordinary it didn't register as coincidence, just life's usual chaos before a wedding. Maya waited near the stage, holding her clutch, scanning faces, planning to take one last family photo before the vows began. But minutes stretched. The hall buzzed with laughter and camera flashes. Still, no Rayyan, no Nadia. A small unease began to form, a whisper in her gut that something was off. She stepped out of the ballroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor, following the faint corridor that led to a terrace overlooking the gardens. She had been there earlier in the day when the decorators arranged flowers. It was quiet. Too quiet now, except for a faint, muffled sound, a giggle. Breathless. Familiar. Maya froze. Her hand hovered on the half-open glass door that led to the terrace. Beyond it, sunlight slanted across marble tiles. Through the reflection on the glass, she saw movement. A man's hand pressed against a woman's waist. A woman's face tilted upward, lips parted in laughter that wasn't laughter at all, but desire. Her mind struggled to make sense of what her eyes already knew. Rayyan's silhouette, Nadia's soft curls brushing his shoulder. The intimacy of it was unmistakable, too practiced to be accidental. Time fractured. She didn't move. Couldn't. The air thinned as if the world had been drained of sound. Then came the words. Clear, cruel, and low. Rayyan's voice edged with contempt she had never heard before. "She'll swallow anything," he said. "Marry the Rahman name, milk it, then we pivot." And Nadia, her own sister, giggled in reply. "You make it sound so easy." "I make everything easy," he whispered. Something inside Maya stopped breathing. The blood in her veins felt sharp, too heavy to carry. For a long second, she thought she might collapse, but she didn't. She just stood there, gripping her clutch until her nails bit into her palm. Her reflection on the glass looked foreign, still, composed, but hollowed out. Behind her, a faint sound, shoes on marble. A man's voice, low and deliberate, cut through the paralysis. "Not here," he said. Maya turned. It was Omar Qasim, Lena's older brother. He wasn't dressed like the other guests. No nervous smile, no champagne glass in hand. His face was unreadable, eyes steady, jaw set. The kind of calm that meant danger wasn't new to him. "You saw?" she managed to whisper. "I saw enough." His gaze flicked toward the terrace, then back to her. "This isn't where you burn them." His words, measured and heavy, fell like stones into still water. For a moment she hated him for his composure. Then she realized he was right. To storm out there would make her a spectacle. To scream would make her small. "Breathe," Omar said quietly. "Go back inside. Pretend nothing happened. The right moment will come. The right moment." It sounded almost impossible, but the steadiness in his voice anchored her. She nodded once and turned away from the glass, forcing her steps not to falter as she walked back into the light. In the hallway, just before she reached the ballroom, she nearly collided with Erez. Her brother's smile faded instantly at the sight of her face. They had a language that didn't need words, just one look, and he knew. His jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat she saw the flash of fury beneath his calm. But then he blinked it away, gave the smallest nod, their old signal from childhood, a silent promise. "I'm here." She swallowed hard. The noise of the wedding washed over her again. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the music swelling. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, every heartbeat echoing with betrayal. But she didn't cry. She didn't run. She lifted her chin, walked to her seat, and let the world believe she was just another happy sister watching her brother's wedding. Inside, her vow crystallized into something cold and clear. She would not bleed in public, not here, not now. She would wait. And when the moment came, the truth would not whisper. It would roar. The door clicked behind us and the world softened to a hush. No violins here, no clinking glass. Just the steady tick of a hotel clock and the faint thunder of applause through the walls. Erez set the bolt with a practiced twist and turned to me. His eyes swept my face the way a doctor reads a monitor, quiet, precise, refusing panic. I braced for the storm that would have felt justified. It never came. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. I told him. Not all the words. Some I couldn't yet repeat without feeling them slice again. But enough. The glass, the terrace, the hand on the waist that wasn't mine. Nadia's laugh that I suddenly didn't recognize. I watched the muscles in his jaw move once and settle. He didn't pace. He didn't curse. He crossed to the credenza, poured water into a glass, and handed it to me like we had all the time in the world. "We're not going to break anything," he murmured. "We're going to place things." A soft knock, then a low voice. "Omar." Erez opened the door just enough to let him in. He slid through with the economy of someone who never wasted movement. He'd shed the emotion of the hallway and put on a different one. Professional, deliberate, edged with an old, controlled anger that didn't belong to today alone. He set a leather folio on the table and flipped it open. Inside, neatly tabbed, were printouts, screenshots, and annotated timelines. Ink marks like surgical sutures tied one date to another. At first glance, it looked like a regular diligence packet. It wasn't. "I didn't come into today blind," Omar said. "I wish I were wrong." His gaze touched mine, a simple acknowledgement that wishes don't matter much in the presence of facts. For the past 6 months, someone's been leaning on our family foundation, compliance flags that don't belong to us, anonymous tips that read like they were written by the same hand, reporters requesting comment on grants we never issued. He turned a page. When we traced the headers on 2 of the emails and cross-checked with traffic Lena's counsel flagged, the same pool of IPs kept reappearing. Then the transfers. He showed us a diagram, a cluster of shells, names meant to sound boring and safe, feeding micropayments into what looked like a donor platform. From that platform, money hopped to a vendor everyone in our city knew for glossy events and discretion. It would have been unremarkable if the vendor hadn't also paid a consultant who filed documents for Rayon's design company. The dates sat in a neat line. Nadia's name threaded through as liaison, a word that suddenly squeezed my chest. Metadata, he said, tapping. It tells on people who think they're clean. Same phones, same nights, same coffee shop router. Your husband shows up where he shouldn't. So does your sister. The room moved an inch. I didn't. Ares did not look at me. He stayed on the paper like it were a map out of a burning house. Who benefits? He asked. Omar turned to a city grid printed on thick paper. Waterfront lots along the old river cut glowed in muted red. Farid Dastur, he said. He's been buying, quietly, parcels that form a noose around the Qasim properties. 2 of his shells funded neighborhood NGOs that suddenly hate our zoning applications. They file pressure letters, stir up hearings, claim we're endangering the river with projects that don't exist. He pointed again to the vendor who sat at the middle like a spider. Rayan's shell takes consulting fees every time a concerned citizen campaign kicks off. I could hear my heartbeat in my throat. So we weren't the story, I said. We were the door. You were the key, Omar corrected softly. Rahman name opens invitations Dastur couldn't buy outright. He doesn't need everything. He needs access to tilt the room. Ares's hand flattened on the table. We cancel the ceremony, he said, but not like a decision, like checking a box before discarding it. He looked up at Omar. Or we finish it. We finish it, Omar said. In front of witnesses, with the stage lights on and the audio clean. You don't pull a puppeteer into a back corridor. You invite him to front row and let him watch the strings snap. It was obscene how right that sounded. I thought of the terrace again, the closeness that felt like theft, and I wanted to tear the world. Instead, I listened. Why would he show? Ares asked. He already has, Omar said. Not in person. In the devices he's paying, the couriers he's booked, the pressure he's built to crest today. You don't assemble this much theater and skip opening night. He rotated the folio and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside lay a pendant on a fine chain, a slender oval of silver, smooth as a river stone. It looked like something a grandmother would give, simple and sentimental. He held it as if it were much heavier than it looked. This is yours if you want it, he said to me. It's a live mic, directional, clipped into the clasp. It transmits to 2 receivers, one with me, one with a tech in the booth. No one will notice, and if they do, it's jewelry. I stared at it, a locket, pretty and unassuming. I thought of my mother's hands, how she'd fasten jewelry at my neck on school mornings. I nodded and lifted my hair. Omar's fingers were steady and professional. The chain went cold against my skin and then disappeared, the oval resting in the hollow at my throat where my pulse spoke the truth even when my mouth didn't. Signal check, Omar said. He tapped his phone. A faint chime answered from inside his jacket. Good. He handed Ares a second pouch. Encrypted thumb drive. Press releases and exhibits A through G. If something happens to me, you walk it to Lena's counsel. They've got a time-stamped email ready to go to the city, the state AG, and 2 reporters who know what to do with paper. Ares slipped it into his inner pocket without looking. His face had gone from brother to executive in a blink. He took out his own phone and fired off 3 terse messages. I'm moving liquid cash to our emergency trust. Board approval's already in place. Any accounts tied to vendors on that diagram go on hold. Lena's counsel? Looped, Omar said. Her compliance team's been working since dawn. She'll tighten locks in 10 minutes and act like she's fixing centerpieces. No one will suspect the bride of good governance. The clock ticked. Applause swelled outside and ebbed. Somewhere, a child squealed with delight at the sight of cake, then was hushed by a laughing mother. It was obscene that the world could hold sweetness and rot in the same hour and keep breathing. "What do you need from me?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone older. "Nothing loud," Omar said. "Nothing theatrical. Pain is your camouflage. Let him be comfortable around you. Let him talk. If he tries to soothe you, let him. If he whispers that I'm overreacting, ask a soft question, and let the silence fill the rest." People confess to fill silences. He slid a small card toward me, half business, half talisman. On it, 4 short cues he wanted me to remember. Repeat his words back to him. Make him confirm. Ask when it started. Men brag about timelines. Ask who knows. They love to name allies. If he insults you, don't rise. Let him show the room who he is. I can do that, I said, surprising myself. Iris stepped closer, touched my shoulder once, the way he used to when monsters lived under beds. "If you want me to shut it down, I will," he said. "Right up until the last second." "I don't want that," I said. "I want the truth to stand up on its own legs." Omar watched us like he was counting breath. "There's one more thing," he said, and drew out a photo taken an hour earlier in a service corridor. A courier's hand passing a velvet box to a banquet manager. Dastor's vendor sent this as a surprise for the bridal table to be opened after speeches. My tech flagged the booking reference. It's a delivery service his office uses as drop cover. "What's inside?" Aris asked. "We scanned it," Omar said. "It's a gift pen. High-end, with a hidden storage module, likely a passkey to a shared drive. He wanted Rayan to make the handoff tonight with a wedding toast." His mouth tightened at the corners. "We'll open it on our terms." The plan congealed from mist into shape. Keep the ceremony intact. Keep the audience seated, let the audio roll. Trigger the screens only when any denial would be swallowed by the evidence flooding the room. Not a fight in a hallway. A demonstration in a court of light. "Lena?" I asked. "She knows enough," Omar said. "Not everything. Not your piece. I won't ruin her hour more than necessary. When it's time, she'll stand." His voice softened at her name. It told me what kind of brother he was. Aris checked the time and exhaled through his nose as if releasing heat without losing temperature. "We're walking into fireworks," he said. "We're lighting them," Omar corrected. He moved to the door and paused, listening to the rhythm outside like a soldier feeling vibrations through a wall. He cracked it an inch, glanced down the hall, then looked back at me. "One last instruction," he said. "When the world turns toward you, look steady. Not angry, not broken. Steady makes cowards feel small." It shouldn't have mattered to me how to look while my life bent out of shape, but it did. There's power in deciding your face. "Okay," I said. Aris kissed my forehead the way our mother used to do when she didn't have words that could fix anything. "I'm here," he said again, the vow that never expired. We stepped back into the corridor. The light felt harsher now. The chandelier crystals too bright, the lilies too sweet. From across the room came Nadia's laugh, then the clap of glasses as someone made a joke. Rayan stood with a small cluster of guests, smiling at something he hadn't earned. He saw me, and his face softened with that well-practiced tenderness he wore like a favorite suit. He started toward me, a hand already lifting, the words already forming. I let him come close. I let the locket listen. If he reached for my hand, I would let him take it and slip on his own rope. If he whispered an apology for being distracted, I would ask what distracted him and wait. If he tried to paint Omar as paranoid, I would ask when he started to feel concerned about the foundation, and watch the timeline assemble itself in his mouth. No scenes, I told myself. Stages. Behind me. Unseen by everyone who believed in romance and frosting, the current changed. Aries moved assets with 3 messages and no tremor in his fingers. Lena signed compliance locks with a pen meant for vows. Omar became the quiet architect of a different ceremony, one made of packets and packets of truth. Somewhere outside, the sun slipped an inch, and the ballroom lights became less decoration and more theater. The MC's voice boomed, warm and welcoming, inviting people to their seats. 100 cameras lifted. The air itself seemed to lean forward. I wrapped my fingers around the silver at my throat and felt its small, cool heart. Stages, I whispered, and walked back into the light. The ballroom had transformed into something out of a dream. Light spilled through the chandeliers like liquid gold, and the hum of anticipation ran through the guests like soft electricity. A harpist plucked at silver strings near the stage, the sound fragile enough to shatter if someone exhaled too loudly. I sat in the front row next to Rayan, my husband, my stranger, his hand draped across the back of my chair, a gesture so familiar it looked loving to everyone watching. He leaned in, brushed his lips against my temple, and whispered, "You look beautiful today." I smiled, because the world expected me to. His thumb pressed once against my shoulder, a subtle, practiced squeeze. The same one he used whenever he wanted control disguised as comfort. The locket against my skin felt colder now, its quiet pulse steadying me more than his touch ever could. Across the aisle, Nadia shimmered under the ballroom lights. Bridesmaid satin hugged her frame, every movement choreographed to seem effortless. The girl I once trusted to finish my sentences now couldn't meet my eyes for longer than a breath. But she looked at him, at Rayan, without thinking. A flicker, a small tilt of the head, the kind of secret glance that would mean nothing to anyone else. To me, it screamed confession. The ceremony began. Lena glided down the aisle, every step wrapped in grace. Aries stood tall, the storm of last night buried behind a calm smile. Only I, perhaps, saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands locked behind his back like a man holding a secret steady. Behind the camera flashes, the air carried quiet purpose. Omar's team had arrived early, blending in with the event crew. They manned the lighting booth, the sound console, even the screens mounted around the ballroom for the guests seated too far back to see the stage. Every screen ran a loop of golden patterns now, but behind those patterns waited something far sharper. Proof. Wire transfers, email threads, audio captures. Evidence disguised as art. I sat perfectly still, pretending to listen to the vows while cataloging every detail that didn't belong. Rayan's cuff, still marked faintly with a smear of lipstick he must have missed. Nadia's new bracelet, diamond chain, delicate but expensive, not her style. She fiddled with it nervously, and the tiny engraving at the clasp caught the light, an initial that wasn't hers. A photographer circled, snapping wide shots of the guests. I tilted my chin toward the camera, let the lens see serenity. The image would read as loyalty, wife poised and proud. But inside, the storm was beginning to take shape, invisible and absolute. When Lena reached the altar, she smiled at Aries, and the world softened again. The priest began to speak. The guests quieted. The scent of lilies thickened in the air, almost too sweet. Beside me, Rayan exhaled, and I realized he thought he had already won. That whatever suspicion I might have felt had dissolved under the charm he wore like armor. He didn't know that. While he adjusted his tie, Omar's technicians were adjusting audio feeds, syncing timestamps, cross-checking metadata from the mic I wore. Every gesture, Every word was being folded into something larger than all of us. A performance for truth itself. Out of the corner of my eye, a new figure entered the hall, a man in a tan suit, thin hair slicked back, holding a gift envelope. Recognition rippled through Omar's expression across the room. It was the city inspector Lena had exposed 2 years ago for accepting bribes from a contractor tied to Farid Dastur. Omar had invited him quietly, a baited move in the larger hunt. 2 tables away, another man arrived late, one of Farid's old associates. His posture betrayed him before his face did. He sat too stiffly, eyes darting from screen to screen, waiting for a cue that wouldn't come. Omar's men flanked him casually, one at the bar, one near the exits. The chessboard was filling, every piece where it needed to be. Rayon leaned toward me again. "After the speeches, let's sneak out for a bit. Just you and me." I tilted my head, let the light catch my earrings. "Of course," I said softly, my voice smooth enough to cut glass. He smiled, believing me. That was his fatal flaw. Believing composure meant surrender. I turned my attention to Lena. Her vows were quiet but fierce, full of small promises that sounded like truth. When she said Araz's name, his voice broke just slightly on the reply. My brother's hand trembled for half a heartbeat, then steadied again. I wondered if love always carried a crack somewhere, or if it was just our family's curse. Omar watched from the far end of the hall, expression unreadable. From time to time he touched his earpiece, murmuring instructions that no one noticed. His eyes met mine once, briefly, enough to let me know everything was on schedule. I gave the smallest nod, the one gesture I could make without raising suspicion. Between toasts and smiles, small moments gathered like quiet thunderclouds. Rayon's phone buzzed twice in his pocket. He ignored it the first time but checked the second. Just a flicker of movement I caught in my periphery. Nadia's eyes followed the motion. Whatever the message was, they both knew. The harpist's melody changed. Something slower, meant to soothe the crowd between vows and dinner. Waiters began their slow circulation of wine. Conversations rose in pockets. The tension under the music was invisible to everyone except us. Then, as if following its own script, a courier entered through the side door, a black suit blending easily among servers. He approached the main table with professional precision, handed a velvet box to the head coordinator, and murmured something that sounded routine. For after the speeches. Omar's gaze followed the box like a predator tracking scent. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just noted the courier's retreat and the way the coordinator placed the package beside the floral centerpiece. Perfectly visible but untouched. The locket against my skin hummed faintly with static. Someone adjusting frequencies, maybe testing the feed. I reached up as if brushing my necklace, my cue to signal everything was fine. Around me, guests laughed, oblivious. The groom and bride fed each other cake while phones flashed. Nadia clapped too hard, too bright. Rayan raised his glass and kissed my cheek for the cameras. My smile didn't falter. Every second was being recorded. Every second was evidence. Somewhere in the control booth, Omar's voice would be low and steady. Hold positions. Wait for his speech. I could feel the plan tightening like silk threads. Rayan's easy confidence began to return, his body relaxing beside me as if nothing existed beyond champagne and music. Nadia's hand brushed his sleeve once as she passed the table. Quick, disguised as reaching for her napkin. He didn't pull away fast enough. The inspector laughed too loudly at something across the room. The ex-associate from Farid's company dabbed sweat from his temple and checked his watch. I watched them both, the edges of guilt painting their every gesture. And through it all, I sat still, heart steady, smile polite. I thought about Omar's words earlier. Steady makes cowards feel small, so I stayed steady. When Lena raised her glass to thank the guests, her voice trembled with happiness. She didn't know that her wedding was now a stage, that the walls carried eyes and the air carried truth. But she looked radiant, and I found a strange comfort in that. Not all beauty is built on lies. Some of it survives in spite of them. The MC announced the first dance. Rayan took my hand. "Come on," he whispered, leading me to the floor. I went, because the stage needed motion. The band began to play something soft, a familiar melody that once belonged to our kitchen mornings, long before betrayal found us. He twirled me gently, smiling for the crowd. "You seem quiet," he said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About?" "Timing," he chuckled, mistaking the word. "Always the planner." "Yes," I said, resting my hand against his chest where his heart beat steady and wrong. "Always." When the song ended, he kissed my hand, a flourish for the cameras. I caught Omar watching us, one brow lifted, as if acknowledging the irony. Guests applauded. The energy lifted. The show moved toward its next act. In the corner of the ballroom, a waiter set down 2 extra microphones near the podium, just in case. Omar's team, disguised as stage techs, didn't touch them yet. They waited. The velvet box gleamed under the chandeliers. The inspector finished his drink and leaned toward the man from Farid's company. I saw the whisper, the brief panic in his eyes. He was realizing something had gone wrong. The trap was closing, and he could feel the air tightening. Rayan clinked his glass, preparing to stand, to speak, unaware that the same stage he thought would host his triumph was already wired for his undoing. And I, his wife, the woman he thought too fragile to notice, sat perfectly composed, the locket cool against my throat, ready to capture the moment the truth began to breathe. The room was already halfway to perfect silence when the master of ceremonies lifted the microphone again. The lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, candles flickered on mirrored tables, and the harpist's melody shifted to something sacred. The crowd leaned forward instinctively. A collective breath held. It was time for the vows. Aries and Lena stood beneath an arch of lilies and gold silk, hands joined, faces radiant under the stage lights. Everything was poised to end in perfection, except that perfection had an expiration date, and Omar knew exactly when it would burn out. I sat in the front row beside Rayan, feeling the steady thrum of my pulse against the cool weight of the locket. He was calm, too calm. His fingers brushed mine on the armrest, affectionate, possessive, rehearsed. He thought the play was his. The MC smiled, lifting his voice. "If any person here knows of any reason these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now." The sentence was still forming when a voice rose from the side aisle. Clear, loud. "Official!" I object. The words hit the air like a gunshot muffled in velvet. Heads turned. Cameras froze mid-pan. Aries blinked once, steady but alert. Lena's hand tightened around his. The man stepping forward wasn't young. His gray suit hung slightly loose, but his posture was exact. I recognized him. The Inspector Omar had quietly invited, the one Lena had exposed 2 years ago. He held up a document sleeve and said, "There's a conflict of interest here. Certain parties present hold undeclared stakes in properties tied to Mr. Farid Dastur's acquisitions, some connected through shell entities, one of which appears on today's sponsorship roster." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Not panic yet, but unease. The kind of sound people make when beauty begins to smell like smoke. Rayan shifted beside me, his grip loosening. Nadia, up near the bridesmaids' row, blinked like a startled bird. And then Omar moved. He rose from his seat near the back, walked with unhurried calm down the center aisle. The crowd parted instinctively, as if sensing authority that didn't need volume. "Let's clear the air," he said into the microphone the inspector had abandoned. His tone wasn't angry. It was factual, measured, the voice of someone used to removing tumors, not treating fevers. He lifted one hand, a subtle signal to the tech booth, and the ballroom screens flickered. The golden backdrop dissolved. Static bloomed. Then, video, a timestamp in the corner. Earlier that day. The corridor outside the terrace. Two figures appeared on screen, Rayan and Nadia. The sound came faintly at first, the muffled rhythm of laughter and whispers. Then the words. "She'll swallow anything," Rayan's voice said. "Marry the ramen name, milk it, then we pivot." Nadia's giggle followed like a blade wrapped in silk. Gasps scattered through the hall. Someone dropped a glass. The harpist's hands froze mid-note. My lungs didn't move. I didn't have to. The room was breathing for me. Rayan shot to his feet. "This is a mistake," he barked, his voice cracking with shock wrapped in arrogance. "This is edited. This is insane." Omar didn't blink. "Then let's widen the lens," he said. Another signal. A parking garage, shadows slicing through fluorescent light. Rayan leaned against a column, looking around. Nadia approached, handed him a slim flash drive. He slipped an envelope into her clutch. They parted quickly, faces hidden, but not well enough. This time no one gasped. They just watched, stunned into stillness. Rayan turned toward me. His face was pale, desperate. "Maya, you know me." I rose, quiet, unhurried. The pendant against my chest caught the stage light. I touched it gently, not for comfort but for connection. "Since when?" I asked, voice steady and low enough to slice through the silence. "Have I been your leverage?" The words carried, too clearly. The locket mic was live. The sound echoed across the hall, magnified, filling every corner of that perfect room. Rayan's mouth opened, but the flinch came first. He understood finally that every breath he took tonight was being recorded. The screens shifted again. This time, spreadsheets, emails, wire trails that glowed like veins across the display. Dummy invoices, offshore routing, fake NGO grants, each line drawing closer and closer to Rayan's company. A smaller side window opened. Nadia's account statements. Consulting stipends, routed from a shell belonging to one of Farid Dastur's proxies. The murmurs returned, sharper now, whispers of names, recognition, betrayal. Rayan's voice wavered between fury and pleading. "This is out of context. It's corporate work. He didn't finish. Because on the main screen now was the velvet box. A split-screen video. Omar's text earlier that afternoon. Gloved hands opening the package under a recorded warrant. Inside, a luxury pen. The pen, however, held more than ink. A close-up revealed the internal key module. Data storage, encrypted. Omar spoke over the footage. "We ran the metadata. This drive links Farid, Dastur's private holdings directly to a payment. Network built through Mr. Rayan Mirza's consulting firm." The audience had gone from spectators to jurors. You could feel the shift. The quiet collective recoil from the couple who once seemed flawless. Rayan's facade cracked completely. "You can't prove, let's help you remember," Omar said calmly. He gestured toward a man seated 2 tables back, older, nervous, sweating through his collar. "Mr. Hale," Omar said evenly, "you worked for Dastur's finance division. You met him last Thursday at the Avalon Club at 8:17 p.m. You told him the Rahman Family Foundation was still too clean. His exact reply? Omar nodded to the booth. A short voice clip filled the air. Farid Dastour's gravelly tone, unmistakable. Apply pressure by scandal. If we can't buy them, break them. The room erupted, not in chaos but in low, horrified noise. The kind people make when they've witnessed something irreversibly wrong. Farid's fixer bolted from his chair. Or tried to. 2 plainclothes officers, already in position, rose with him. One flashed a badge. The other gripped his arm firmly. The man froze, eyes darting toward Rayan, who was now visibly unraveling. "This is entrapment," Rayan shouted. You set this up." Omar didn't raise his voice. "No," he said. "You built it. We just turned on the lights. Security sealed the exits. Investigators in dark suits entered quietly through the side doors." Omar had filed the report hours ago. Time-stamped. Witnessed. Every move had been pre-cleared. Lena stood beside Iris now, one hand covering her mouth, the other resting on his shoulder. Ariz's expression didn't waver. Rage and vindication held in perfect equilibrium. I turned slightly toward Nadia. She was trembling, her mascara streaked, the bracelet on her wrist glinting under the lights, Rayan's initial engraved at the clasp. Her voice broke into a sob that turned sharp halfway through. "You were never enough, Maya," she spat suddenly, the mask gone. "You never were." He wanted someone who could help him. Her words hung. Brittle and ugly. I met her eyes and said softly, "I was never for sale." The crowd didn't clap, but the silence that followed was louder than any applause. Nadia's face crumpled. Rayan tried to move toward me, but an officer intercepted him. The inspector, now visibly shaken, stepped aside as investigators documented the equipment, the recordings, the statements already being transmitted to an off-site archive. The MC stood frozen, still holding his cue card for ring exchange. The irony would have been comedic if the room weren't suffocating on truth. Aries moved to the microphone. His voice, calm but lethal, cut through the chaos. "This ceremony was meant to bind love," he said. "Instead, it unbound deceit. And I, for one, am grateful for the honesty of this moment." Applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then spreading. It wasn't for pain or spectacle. It was for courage, for exposure, for the rare sight of truth standing on its own legs in a room full of pretense. Rayan slumped into his chair, head in his hands. Nadia sank beside him, whispering something that sounded like prayer or curse. Omar turned to me. His voice was low, meant only for me to hear. "It's done." But it wasn't quite done. Because as they led Farid's fixer toward the exit in handcuffs, he twisted back, eyes finding Omar. "You think you won?" He hissed. "You don't even know what's buried under your foundation." Omar didn't answer. He didn't need to. The cameras caught the whole thing. As the guests began to leave in clusters, murmuring, recording, questioning, I stood there, hands still at my sides, watching the gold light fade across the stage. No rings were exchanged that night. No music played them out. The ceremony ended in applause. Not for love, but for truth, and when the applause finally died, all that remained was the quiet hum of the locket against my skin, still recording, still bearing witness, until Omar reached over and switched it off. The hotel had gone almost silent. The chandeliers still glowed, but their light felt wrong now, like makeup left on after a funeral. Outside the ballroom, the air reeked of champagne gone flat and wilted lilies. Guests had scattered, leaving behind overturned glasses, smudged napkins, and the ghost of applause that didn't belong to love. A security guard opened the door to a private suite upstairs. and we slipped inside, Aries, Lena, Omar, and me. The door clicked shut behind us, and the world outside ceased to exist. No one spoke at first. Aries poured water into 4 glasses, though none of us drank. He leaned against the dresser, eyes dark, still locked in the controlled calm he'd been wearing since the truth broke open downstairs. Lena sat on the sofa, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked bone white. Omar stood by the window, phone in hand, scanning messages with the precision of a soldier listening for landmines. I was the first to break the silence. So that's it? My voice sounded flat, foreign. He's arrested. The contracts are frozen. It's over. Omar didn't look up. Pieces are moving, but over? No. Lena's voice trembled. The inspectors took statements. They said charges would be filed within the hour. They'll file them, Omar said. But Fareed doesn't lose on paper. He loses when his reach is gone. Aries exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He won't take humiliation quietly. He's too invested in control. Exactly. Omar pocketed his phone and turned to face us. That's why he wasn't there tonight. The realization landed like ice water. Fareed Dastoor hadn't shown up. Not in the ballroom, not among the guests, not even in the parking footage Omar's team was monitoring. The man behind everything, the one who orchestrated the campaign against Lena's foundation, who planted Rayan and Nadia in our lives, had stayed invisible. He expected the fallout. Omar continued quietly. Rayan, Nadia the fixer, they were all expendable. He needed someone to take the public burn. That was always the plan. I sat down slowly, the edges of the room beginning to blur. So this was a test run, not the war. Omar nodded once. Exactly. For a long minute, no one moved. The air hummed with exhaustion and dread, like a machine still cooling after overload. Then came a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. Aries crossed the room and opened it halfway. Rayan stood there. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his tie missing. The polished mask was gone. What replaced it was hollow-eyed, desperate. Aries, he started, but his gaze darted toward me. Please, I just need a moment with her. Aries looked at me for confirmation. I nodded once. Omar shifted his stance but didn't leave. He moved toward the far corner, close enough to intervene if needed. Rayan stepped inside and shut the door behind him. For a second, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. The arrogance had drained away, replaced by the strange calm of someone who knows the world has already ended. Maya, he said softly. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I stared at him. Which part? He swallowed. Any of it. It started as work. I was helping Fareed with contracts, small logistics. He said he needed someone with connections to your family, that it would help your brother's projects. I swear it wasn't supposed to involve my sister. I cut in. His mouth opened, then closed. Nadia was... She was convenient. I finished for him. He stepped closer, desperation leaking through his voice. I loved you, Maya. Whatever happened, you have to believe that. I laughed once. Soft, bitter. You loved access, I said. Access to my brother, to his name, to his world. To mine. He froze. For a heartbeat, the room felt too quiet. The kind of silence that hums before something shatters. Then I stepped aside, opened the door, and said without looking at him, We're done here. Rayan hesitated, as if expecting me to cry, to plead, to soften. When I didn't, he walked out. The door shut behind him with a sound like the end of a song. Lena rose from the couch, eyes glassy. Nadia's still in the hotel, she said quietly. They're keeping her separate until statements are complete. Aries looked toward Omar. Let me talk to her first. Omar nodded once. Go. Aries left, his back straight but his hands trembling at his sides. When the door closed again, Lena sat back down, covering her face. "How did we get here?" she whispered. "A wedding that turned into this." "No one expects Rot to smile this wide," I said. A minute passed before Aries returned. His expression was grim. "She's spiraling," he said. Crying, then angry, then apologizing, blaming everything except herself. I stood, feeling the fatigue spread through me like fog. What did she say? That she didn't mean to hurt you. His voice was tight. That Farid promised her a better life. Said she'd be the face of one of his charities, get a house, money, security. She says she was tired of living in your shadow. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. "She was my sister," I whispered. "I would have given her everything if she'd just asked." "She didn't want what you'd give," Aries said quietly. "She wanted what he'd sell." No one spoke after that. Outside the window the city glittered, unbothered, its towers reflecting the light of 1,000 other lives untouched by ours. Omar's phone buzzed. He glanced at it once, and his face changed. The calm that never left him cracked, just slightly. "What is it?" Aras asked. Omar turned the screen toward us. A message glowed against the dark background. No name. No number, just words. "Miss the docks tonight. Or lose the river." Lena straightened. "What does that mean?" Omar's jaw tightened. "The Qasim Foundation's main properties sit along the riverfront. If Farid wants leverage again, that's where he'll strike. Contracts, sabotage, something public enough to distract from tonight's fallout." Aris's expression hardened. "He's warning you. He's challenging us," Omar corrected. "He knows we'll come." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The idea of walking into another confrontation so soon felt unbearable, but there was no question of waiting. "Farid wasn't bluffing. What if it's a trap?" Lena asked softly. Omar gave a small, humorless smile. "Then we make it ours." He pulled a small case from his jacket, setting it on the table. Inside, compact radios, a camera pen, and a USB drive sealed in evidence tape. "We record everything. We move as one. No mistakes." Aris looked at him steadily. "You've done this before." "Too many times," Omar said. "But never with this much to lose." I stepped closer, looking at the reflection of the city lights on the window pane. The dock stretched somewhere beyond them, cold, industrial, waiting. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Omar's eyes met mine. "Be the one he doesn't see coming. He knows me, he knows Ares, but he underestimates you. That's our advantage." I nodded slowly. "Good." Lena's voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't have to go through this, Maya. Not tonight. Not after everything." I turned to her, managed a faint smile. "After everything, it feels like the only thing I can do." Ares placed a hand on my shoulder. "We go together." Omar slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Then we don't waste time." He pulled back the curtain and looked down at the city one last time, scanning the horizon where the river lights flickered faintly in the dark. "Farid thinks he's still writing the story," he said. "Let's show him he's not even holding the pen." We left the suite without another word. The elevator ride down was silent, filled with the hum of fluorescent light and the faint static of adrenaline. When the doors opened, the air outside smelled of rain and metal. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the skyline. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine already running. Omar opened the rear door for Lena, then turned to me. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "don't break character. Fear is what he listens for." I met his gaze. "I'm past fear," he nodded once. "Good." The car pulled away from the curb, cutting through the empty streets toward the river. The city blurred by in streaks of light and shadow. Behind us, the hotel, once a temple of love and lies, shrunk into the distance. Ahead, the docks waited, cloaked in fog and the kind of darkness that always feels deliberate. And somewhere in that darkness, the man who had orchestrated every loss of ours was waiting, too calm, too patient. But this time, we weren't walking into his game. We were bringing our own board. The river looked metallic under the moonlight, cold, rippling silver broken by the faint buzz of dock lights. The air smelled of oil and rain, the kind of scent that seeps into your lungs and stays there. The car rolled to a stop near the warehouse line. Omar killed the headlights, scanning the distance. Fog hung low over the water, swallowing the sound of waves against the steel pylons. Somewhere, a ship's horn moaned like a tired animal. "This is the place?" Ares asked. Omar nodded once. "Pier 12. He'll come to us." We stepped out of the car, the night wrapping around us like damp cloth. My heels clicked softly against the concrete until Omar gestured for silence. Lena stayed close to Ares, her arm looped through his. The wind tangled her hair, but her face was carved in calm resolve. A figure emerged from the fog near the waterline, stooped, slow, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. The old harbor clerk, Omar had mentioned him once before. A man who knew how the city's waterfront grew its skeletons. He stopped a few paces away. The light from the dock lamp cut his face into angles, deep wrinkles, nicotine-stained fingers, eyes that darted like mice. "You came alone?" He rasped. Omar's tone was even. "We came clean. That's what matters." The clerk glanced around as if expecting shadows that weren't there. "He shouldn't have reached this deep again," he muttered. "You dig too far into the river. You find bodies. Then let's find them," Omar said. The man hesitated, then reached into his coat. From inside, he pulled a weathered ledger, its cover stiff with age, the edges curled and smudged with grease. He held it out to Omar like it burned to touch. "Found this in the archives before they wiped the records. Old Harbor Registry, permits, safety audits, complaints, all from the early days of the riverfront reconstruction." Omar flipped the cover open under the weak lamplight. Rows of typewritten entries lined the pages: contractors, approval stamps, inspection notes. Then came the section marked Blacklisted Entities. "Here," the clerk said, pointing with a trembling finger. "Rahman Construction, blacklisted 21 years ago for alleged safety violations on Dock Line 4. I stepped closer, staring at the line that carried my father's company name. The letters blurred. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Dad's firm was cleared. They never found any violations." "They didn't need to find them," the clerk said bitterly. "All it took was one anonymous complaint with a signature that checked out on paper. One name that never existed." Omar turned another page, scanning. "The complainant?" The clerk tapped the margin beside the typed code. "Registered as Dastor Maritime Holdings." My stomach dropped. The air seemed to leave the dock. Fareed. It had started with him. Not recently. Not through Rayon or Nadia or the foundation scandals. No, this rot went deeper, buried decades into the soil beneath everything we had built. The ledger trembled in Omar's hand as he flipped back to the earlier years. He used a shell to take contracts from blacklisted firms. He'd file fake complaints, tank their bids, then buy up their debt through proxies. The Rahmans weren't his first, but they were his most useful. Your father's name carried respect. Once he fell, others followed. The words hit me like a slow collapse. I remembered my father's face in those last months, the lines deepening, the phone calls that ended with him rubbing his forehead, the silence that filled our house like ash. I was 13 when he died. Heart failure, they said. But even then, I knew it wasn't the heart. It was the weight. He'd spent his last year fighting to clear his name. insisting the reports were forged, that the city had been bribed to push him out. Everyone said grief made him paranoid. Now I knew it was just honesty with bad timing. Ars's jaw tightened as he read over Omar's shoulder. "He killed our father's work," he said quietly. "And we never saw it." "He did worse," Omar murmured. "He used it as leverage to build his empire. Every contract, every permit, every expansion along this river carries the bones of what he buried back then." Lena stepped closer. "Why us? Why our families?" Omar's eyes lifted to her. "Because your father stopped him once." She frowned. 10 years ago, the Qasim group blocked a zoning exception that would have given Farid control over the southern docks, Omar explained. "He tried to buy the votes, but your father and the city board voted him out. He lost millions, swore he'd dismantle everyone who stood in his way, piece by piece. So he started with us," Ariz said. "First the Rahmans, then the Qasims." "Exactly." Omar's tone was surgical. "Divide and weaken. Use scandals, not bullets." The fog thickened, and for a moment the sound of the river seemed to deepen, heavy as breath. I touched the silver locket at my throat, a nervous habit that had become instinct. My thumb brushed the back of it, and something small caught against the pad of my finger. It wasn't smooth. There was a ridge, tiny, almost imperceptible. I turned slightly toward the light, fingernail tracing the edge. It wasn't decoration. It was a seam. "Omar," I said softly. "This locket, look." He leaned in, his expression sharpening. "Where did this come from again?" "It was my mother's," I said. "Ariz and I found it in her jewelry box after she died." Omar pulled a small tool from his pocket, something thin and sharp, meant for field work. He slid it into the seam, twisted gently. The back of the locket clicked open, not to reveal a photo, but a sliver of metal so fine it looked like foil, engraved with a microscopic pattern. "Not a design," Omar murmured. "Numbers, coordinates, or—" He angled it under the light. "A bank box code." Ariz's eyes widened. "You're saying she knew?" "She knew," Omar said. "Your mother must have found something. Maybe your father suspected. She hid the evidence where no one would think to look." "A locket isn't just sentimental. It's survival," the old clerk whistled low. "You Rahmans keep your ghosts busy." Omar pocketed the sliver carefully. "There's a federal bank branch 2 blocks from where the Rahman office used to be. If this code's still valid, that's where we go." We left the docks an hour later, the fog still clinging to the water like a warning. The vault was colder than the night had been. Inside the private access room, a banker keyed in the number Omar had decoded from the locket. The safe hissed open. He set a small metal box on the table and stepped back, polite but curious. Omar nodded once and the man left, closing the door behind him. The box was old, bank-issued, the kind that should have been emptied decades ago. A label inside bore my mother's name, faded but clear. My hands trembled as Omar lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, old glossy prints from a film camera. Farid Dastoor in his 30s, smiling beside a city regulator during a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Another showed him shaking hands with the same man in a private setting, a yacht, champagne, contracts on the table. The regulator's name I recognized instantly. Abbas Rafiq, now the deputy mayor. Below the photos lay documents, off-book land grants, purchase orders that bypassed official ledgers. And under those, wrapped in thin tissue paper, a cassette tape. Ariz lifted it gently, frowning. "Audio? Looks that way," Omar said. He found a small portable player in his bag, old but reliable, and inserted the tape. Static filled the air, then voices. The first voice was my father's, steady, exhausted. "You can't do this, Farid. These docks feed half the workers in this city." Then Farid's reply, smooth, dismissive. "You were useful, Rahman. But progress needs control. If I can't own your bids, I'll starve them." My heart clenched. Hearing my father's voice after all those years, still fighting, still believing he could reason with a monster, was like reopening a wound that had never scarred. The tape ended with the sound of a door slamming. Silence followed. Omar turned it off slowly. "That's enough," he said. "This ties him directly to regulatory fraud and coercion. The deputy mayor, too. With this, we can bury his empire legally, not emotionally." Ares sank into the chair, elbows on his knees. "He ruined our father, then used his death to build his foundation." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "And he tried to finish the job through us." Omar closed the box carefully, locking it again. "He won't expect us to use the old against him. He believes we're only fighting in the present. That's why he'll lose." He stood, eyes hard as the steel vault around us. "We don't scorch earth," he said quietly. "We cut the root." We spent the next hour building what Omar called Plan 2.0. Ariz handled the financial arm, pulling archived Rahman contracts, connecting them to Dastur's old proxies. Lena coordinated with her foundation's legal board, drafting the regulator complaint and prepping verified copies of the documents. Omar worked through the night, setting up a digital drop. At dawn, the press would receive a data packet exposing Dastur's historical fraud. Simultaneously, a complaint would hit the deputy mayor's ethics office. And by midday, shareholders of Dastur Holdings would receive a summons for an emergency board meeting, supported by undisputable evidence of financial misconduct. A three-pronged strike. "What about you?" Ariz asked him finally. Omar's eyes didn't leave the laptop screen. "I'll be in that meeting. He won't see me until the cameras are rolling." I watched him type, calm, methodical. His fingers moved like someone setting dominoes in perfect alignment. When he finally looked up, dawn light had begun to seep through the blinds, gray, cold, but real. He smiled faintly. "By tonight, Farid Dastur won't own a river, a company, or a lie left to his name." And for the first time in my life, I believed in justice. Not the kind that arrives through prayers, but the kind that walks in with proof. The marble lobby of Dastur Holdings shimmered like a mirror. Cameras crowded the hallway, reporters, shareholders, assistants whispering updates through earpieces. Above the noise, the company's logo glowed on a massive LED wall, a blue crescent wrapping around a globe. It looked untouchable, eternal. Until today. Omar walked ahead of us, expression blank, movements surgical. He wore a tailored gray suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, calm as a blade sheathed in light. Ares followed, the picture of composure, official badge in pocket, proxy documents signed and sealed. Through him, Omar had quietly secured shareholder status for all of us, and I sat quietly in the aisle seat of the back row, silver locket against my skin. The hum of the crowd vibrated in my bones. This was Shareholders' Day. The quarterly meeting meant to celebrate Dastur's latest financial triumphs. The ballroom was draped in corporate perfection. Navy banners, crystal water bottles, spotless white linens. Media outlets had been invited under the guise of a philanthropy announcement. In truth, they were here for something much larger. Farid Dastur stood at the podium, silver hair slicked back, smile confident as ever. To anyone watching, he was a visionary, one of those men who built cities with charm and steel. But behind that facade lived the rot that had eaten through both our families. He began his speech, Voice rich and magnetic. Ladies and gentlemen, I've always believed our greatest strength lies not in profit, but in trust. The irony almost made me laugh. Aries sat 3 rows ahead, his back straight, phone resting face down beside his notebook. Lena sat beside him, her expression calm but her knuckles white. Omar stood along the side wall near the media console, pretending to check his notes. Then, at exactly 11:47 a.m., he raised his hand slightly, as if stretching. It was the same gesture he'd used at the wedding. The cue. The screens behind Fareed flickered once, twice, then froze. The crowd murmured. Fareed frowned, glancing toward the tech crew. Seems we're having some... And then Omar's voice filled the speakers. Apologies for the interruption, he said evenly, stepping forward. Before we continue celebrating trust, I'd like to clarify what kind we're talking about. Gasps rippled across the hall. Security shifted uneasily. Omar turned to the media tables. You all deserve transparency. Dastur Holdings has operated for decades under the promise of public service. But truth doesn't hide behind profit margins. The screens changed. First, the docs. Photos of ledgers, permits, and blacklisted contractors flashed across the displays. Headings read, Rahman Construction, terminated, 2004. Beneath it, a signature, Dastur Maritime Holdings. Fareed's color drained. This, Omar continued, was how Mr. Dastur began his empire, by fabricating safety violations, destroying smaller firms, then buying their debt. He didn't build this riverfront. He stole it. The next slide appeared. Photographs from the vault. Fareed and the deputy mayor. Abbas Rafiq, toasting with champagne aboard a yacht. Another photo. Off-book land grants. The signatures visible even to the camera zooming in. Some of you might recognize the deputy mayor, Omar said smoothly. His name is on every zoning approval this company received. The crowd stirred. Journalists leaned forward, snapping photos, whispering names into recorders. Fareed slammed his palm against the podium. That's slander, he roared. None of that has been authenticated. Omar's eyes met his. Then let's authenticate it together. He turned slightly, gesturing to the AV team. A brief static hum filled the speakers. Then came the sound of a tape click. You can't do this, Fareed. These docks feed half the workers in this city. You were useful, Rahman. But progress needs control. If I can't own your bids, I'll starve them. The audio echoed through the hall like thunder. I closed my eyes, recognizing my father's voice. Years collapsed into one moment. The late nights, the silence, the man who died believing he'd failed. And now the world was hearing his truth. Fareed's voice broke through, shaking with fury. That's manufactured. Dead men can't testify. Omar raised a brow. True, but the living can. He gestured again. On the screen appeared a video feed, live. The deputy mayor, Abbas Rafiq, seated in what looked like an interrogation room. This is Deputy Mayor Rafiq, Omar said, voice calm as steel. He's agreed to cooperate with investigators this morning. The deputy mayor looked directly into the camera. I confirm, he said, voice hollow, defeated. Fareed Dastur offered payments in exchange for blocking Rahman construction bids and approving fraudulent land transfers. I took the bribes. He orchestrated them. Gasps. Reporters bolted upright. The sound of shutters filled the air. Fareed lunged from the podium toward the tech booth. Turn it off, he barked, voice cracking. Shut this down! But Omar was already moving. He lifted a small remote, clicked once. The feed split again. Spreadsheets, encrypted signatures, and finally, a company seal stamped by Omar's own firm, verified and code-signed by Qasim Cyber Defense. Every number, Every transfer, every date locked in with blockchain timestamps. Uneditable, bulletproof. This, Omar said, is the audit of Mr. Destour's shells, validated by an independent firm. Signed by me. Fareed froze halfway across the stage. Cameras swung toward him. Security hesitated. No one wanted to touch the man now bathed in evidence. He tried one last move. This is theft of private property. No, Omar said softly. This is truth returning to its rightful owners. Fareed lunged toward the nearest laptop. Ariz stepped from his seat before security could, blocking the aisle. His calm was lethal. Sit down, Mr. Destour. Reporters swarmed the front row. Mr. Destour, is it true? Did you bribe city officials? Did you sabotage Rahman Construction? The sound became chaos. Flashes, shouts, the metallic whine of microphones scraping tables, and then sirens. 2 investigators entered from the back doors, badges raised. Another group followed from the east corridor. The deputy mayor was already in custody elsewhere. Now they were here for Fareed. His CFO stood abruptly, trembling. I have documents, he stammered. He ordered every payment. I'll testify, just get me protection. Omar nodded once to the lead investigator. He's telling the truth. You'll find his name on the last page of the audit packet. The officer's radio crackled. Copy. Proceed with detainment. When they placed cuffs around Fareed's wrists, the room fell into an eerie quiet. His eyes darted toward me, sharp, venomous, almost curious. You think this ends with me? He hissed. You think the city changes? I met his gaze evenly. No, but it begins without you. The click of the cuffs echoed like punctuation. Cameras caught everything. Reporters rushed the aisle. Security guided them back. Flashes painted the scene in white. The man who had once owned the river now looked small beneath it. After the arrest, the press conference unfolded like clockwork. Omar gave a concise statement. No theatrics, no self-congratulation. This is not revenge, he said. It's restoration. Ariz stood beside him, Lena's hand resting over his. The legacy of our father, once buried under lies, now had air to breathe again. When the crowd began to disperse, Rayan appeared at the periphery of the room, escorted by an officer. He'd been called as a witness to corroborate the shell transactions. His suit was wrinkled, his face hollow. I walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. He looked up when I stopped a few feet away. Maya, he began, voice trembling. I didn't know how far. I didn't let him finish. I took off my wedding ring, cold against my skin, and placed it in his palm. This was never yours to wear, I said. No grand speech, no anger, just finality. He nodded once, tears gathering but unfallen. When the officer led him away, he didn't resist. Later, in the smaller press room, Nadia sat at a side table, pale and shaken. She had agreed to cooperate, to record a statement naming Fareed's recruiter, the one who had targeted women from struggling families and funneled them into his schemes as consultants. The cameras rolled quietly as she spoke, voice trembling but clear. I thought I was being offered a chance, she said. I didn't realize I was being turned into a weapon. When she finished, she looked at me through the glare of the lights. For a moment I saw the sister I used to know, the one who laughed too loudly, dreamed too big. I didn't embrace her. But I didn't turn away either. After all, mercy doesn't mean forgetting. It just means not becoming the thing that broke you. Outside, the sky had turned the color of pale gold. The air was crisp, the world strangely quiet for what it had just witnessed. Omar joined me by the steps, coat slung over his arm, expression unreadable. It's done, he said. I nodded, looking toward the horizon. Not really, but enough, he followed my gaze. Your father would have been proud. I touched the locket, the one that had started everything, and smiled faintly. He already knew the truth. We just had to make the world listen. Omar turned slightly, his tone softer now. You know, when I said we don't scorch earth, we cut the root. I looked at him. Yes? He smiled. A small, rare thing. Sometimes the soil still heals. And for the first time in years, I felt that it could. The sea was calm that morning. Soft gray waves rolling toward the sand, dissolving into white lace and silence. There was no orchestra, no grand entrance, just wind carrying the scent of salt and sun-warmed driftwood. A few chairs stood in the sand, half-circled around a simple wooden arch woven with white flowers. Ariz and Lena faced each other beneath it, bare feet in the tide. It had been 6 months since the day everything changed. 6 months since the screens lit up and lies collapsed under their own weight. The world had moved on, but we hadn't hurried to follow. Healing, I'd learned, isn't a sprint. It's a tide that comes and goes until one day it simply stays. Aries slipped a ring onto Lena's hand, quietly, reverently. No stage this time, he said. No audience but the sea. Lena smiled, tears catching the light. That's all I ever wanted. They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the guests, just family, a few close friends, clapped softly. I watched them, heart steady instead of aching. It was strange how peace looked so simple when it finally arrived. Omar stood beside me, hands in his pockets, sunglasses catching the morning sun. He wasn't the kind of man who fit easily into softness, but somehow he didn't look out of place here. You did it, I said quietly. He glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. We did it. Still, I said, thank you. For everything. He tilted his head slightly. For ruining a wedding and an empire? For giving me something better, I said. Safety without control. His gaze softened, and for a long moment the wind filled the silence between us. Not tension, just understanding. The kind that doesn't need words anymore. The Rahman name had cleared. The city's papers had run the story for weeks. Decades-old corruption uncovered. Whistleblower families vindicated. Contracts that had once been poisoned now reopened. Ariz rebuilt our father's company, not as something grand, but as something honest, and together we started something new, the Locket Fund. A small foundation that helped whistleblowers and betrayed spouses find footing again. People laughed at the name until they heard the story behind it. Then they didn't. We didn't talk much about Rayan or Nadia. They both disappeared into different kinds of silence. His in legal proceedings, hers in community service and quiet atonement. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't wish them anything anymore. As the ceremony ended, the guests wandered toward the small table set with tea and pastries. Children ran barefoot through the foam, their laughter blending with the tide. Ariz raised a toast. Nothing formal, just a few words about beginning again. When the sun began to drop, painting the water gold, I walked a little away from the crowd. The waves lapped at my ankles, cool and clean. I unclasped the silver locket and opened it. Inside, a tiny photo of our parents, the only one I'd kept, smiled back at me. Folded behind it was the slip of paper Omar had found inside the vault box. My mother's handwriting, delicate and unshaken, read, "Choose truth, then peace." For years I'd done the opposite. Chased peace through silence, through endurance, through pretending. But truth, once spoken, had given me something stronger than peace. It had given me freedom. I closed the locket, feeling its weight settle against my heart. The waves receded, leaving wet sand smooth and new beneath my feet. Behind me, Omar called my name. His voice carried over the wind, steady, certain. I turned, smiling. Some stories don't end in forgiveness. Mine ends in freedom, and a door that opens without fear.